And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Stanford medicine scientists have launched dozens of research projects as part of the global response to COVID-19. Some aim to prevent, diagnose, and treat the disease. Others aim to understand how it spreads and how people's immune systems respond to it. On today's Open Connection, MLA Ellis shares about a recent interaction with a Vancouver company.
This new technology based on the academic world, meaning the people that came from Stanford, for example, and they combined them with the people that knew how to design ventilation systems. And they couldn't get an audience with anybody to kind of get them to look at some of the technologies they developed. And so I went to them and told them, I said, look, I'll look at your presentation, but I am no expert on ventilation. I am no expert on COVID. And so that's how I came across this information. I actually sat in a Zoom call, a video call, and they showed me a PowerPoint, and we talked back and forth with question and answers for about 45 minutes. We still don't have a good handle on what COVID is. We're talking about the variants. How effective is vaccines, for example, first dose, second dose, and on and on and on. And I think that's just the nature of viruses. But the one thing that really shocked me about all of this was the idea that the bigger concern for COVID transmission is aerosols. We know that the mask, using the mask, is based on droplets. So if you're coughing, sneezing, singing, from an infected person, that's basically how COVID gets transmitted. But in this presentation, based on the experts, they said, and based on the World Health Organization, by the way, that aerosols are the bigger concerns, not the droplets, but the smaller type of moisture in the air that you can't see. And this shocked me. It still shocks me today. I still feel pretty unsettled about this, because what they said was, in an enclosed space, an enclosed room, this aerosol that contains COVID can actually float in the air from anywhere from 4 to 7 days. I had to stop the presentation and ask, hey, wait a minute. Did you say that COVID can float in the air in an enclosed space for up to 7 days? They said, yes, that's right. And so I started asking, I said, well, how come we don't know this as a general public? This is the first time I've heard this. And they said, well, it's based on the studies, and it's coming out of the World Health Organization. They made an announcement here a few months ago about this, but nobody was really interested. And I'm incredibly interested. To be honest, I still don't know what to think about this aerosol floating around, and I'm not the guy to be going out there telling people, what to do and whatnot, but I think this needs a conversation. And I do understand the cost of this kind of technology in terms of implementing it in every single room across BC. I know we have to be realistic about this, but it's, if the corporations, like some of the bigger corporations now, are starting to trial this technology in their offices right now as we speak. And what they like about it is that it's not an HVAC system. It's a new technology. And you can actually just set it up in your room right there, or you can have a central system similar to an HVAC system. And what it does is it sucks out all the particles in the air, including aerosols. And then within that machine, they kill COVID viruses with ultraviolet rays. Then they send that clean air back into the room. So basically, they're scrubbing the air. I think that we need this conversation. And in fact, I'm really trying to figure out a way to get down to Vancouver to see this technology in action. And I want to see the proof. I mean, according to them, that you can really feel the difference when you walk in terms of air quality. And people just feel safer because they know, they're breathing air that's being scrubbed anywhere, depending on a room size, anywhere from 4 to 8 times an hour.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. After every 2 general elections, a 3-person independent, nonpartisan Electoral Boundaries Commission is established to propose changes to the area, boundaries, and names of electoral districts in British Columbia. This ensures that each MLA represents a similar number of people. Let us return to the conversation as MLA Ellis shares some of his concerns.
Every political party has stressed the need to protect the representation of rural ridings such as Skeena or Stikine or the Peace region or places like Revelstoke down in the lower BC. Every party has stressed this. The difference coming up this year is that the government is proposing to take away that protection of rural areas. Basically because they're saying that the lower mainland is getting more populated and they need more representation. And so I think a lot of rural people are starting to be concerned in terms of, okay, how does this affect the representation in Victoria that we have? Does it dilute my representation? How effective is it to have an MLA that can cover off, say, twice the size of the riding that they're covering right now? So for instance, as an MLA for Skeena, I represent the better part of 32,000 people from Kitimat Village, Terrace, Niska, Kitsilkalem, Kitsilas, 32,000 people. And, you know, depending on weather, it could take me anywhere from 3 to 5 hours to get from my home in Kitimat Village to the out further point in the riding, which is Kincolith. And in wintertime, maybe it takes longer. And how in a bigger riding twice that size with maybe 60,000 people, if they combine us into, say, Prince Rupert, or they combine us with Smithers, those ridings, what does that do in terms of people that want to access the MLA's office? Or how does the MLA try to represent a larger riding with more people with basically the same amount of resources? So essentially what they're talking about now is basically the ridings in the rural areas, especially up here in the north, will have to be combined. And we're just not sure how they're going to do it. Yeah, adding more representatives to the area is actually a possibility too, they're considering. But basically what the government has to do is appoint an independent commission. And the independent commission will go out and they'll actually do the consultations with people. I don't know how they'll do it with travel restrictions, because I know a lot of older people who care about this and understand it really don't have access to internet and don't have access to Zoom and don't understand how to use it and those kinds. So I don't know how they're going to do it. And so it's actually a great question. And I think that the rural people, just like how people in BC got involved with the proportional representation question, you've got to get involved with this one because it means representation in Victoria. And more importantly, what I think is that the timing for this could be amended given that we're not out of COVID yet. And people are just not thinking about these kind of issues. They're thinking about their jobs. They're thinking about their mental health. They're thinking about their kids in school. There's a lot of different things BCers are thinking about. And so I doubt it'll make any change to what the government's planning, but I just say, could you at least stall this for another year or two until we're fully out of COVID? BC is so diverse. I mean, you look at what Terrace is becoming in terms of a hub for business, say with the inland port, Terrace Industrial Development Lands up by the airport. They've got a real vision to actually build up not only their economy, but their tax base. Kitimat's got LNG. But if you drive, a couple hours up Highway 16, Smithers has got a completely different outlook on issues. Prince Rupert has got a completely different outlook. And so when you start to lump a large area like this into one riding, it's going to be really tough for an MLA to figure out exactly what kind of position they should be taking, unless you got a really strong MLA that can understand the underlying issues, as well can understand the overall vision of an area. But the goals and objectives of every single town let alone the regions are so different in BC. And that's what makes BC such an interesting place, our diversity and our geography. Well, you know, under proportional representation, one of the possible scenarios was a ruling party could appoint an MLA. A winning party could appoint the MLA to a certain representation of a riding. And I made this example and say, so okay, say my party won. And everybody knows that I'm economic minded, I'm resource extraction minded, along with good environmental standards. Would it be really fair, say for Haida Gwaii, for example, to be represented by somebody like me? I just didn't see it. And so this kind of raises a lot of different questions in terms of rural ridings, in terms of the representation and the goals of what that riding wants to achieve. And by the way, rural ridings is one of the biggest economic drivers of BC to begin with. We're the ones that have the forestry, the mining, the LNG. We're the ones that do it. And that all feeds into, you know, the province of BC. And so I think that should be taken into consideration when you're talking about redrawing the boundaries in terms of our ridings.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. According to the British Columbia's government website, attracting investment to your community requires careful planning, promotion, and follow-up. Having an economic development plan and investment attraction strategy. Let us rejoin the conversation as MLA Ellis responds to Woodside LNG's recent announcement.
Woodside a couple of days ago said that they're going to actually pull out of Kitimat. And so I'm not really concerned about what this means to the balance of LNG project in Kitimat or BC per se. My question is, why are investors not coming to BC and investing? What is scaring them away? Because Asia, India, Japan, Korea, China, they want LNG, they want energy in all its forms. They're still hungry for energy. And I think the world wants these countries to get off coal and get off dirty fuel. Being in this game for the last 17 years, I thought I knew, you know, the balances between the world economics. In this case, I don't understand. I don't know. Because when the project this size, with the volume of gas you're talking about, and the certainty that you have already, why can this project not get built? I mean, there's still some smaller projects in BC, meaning Haida Cedar project, wood fiber out of Squamish, and now we're actually talking about Western LNG that's actually restarting the negotiations with Niska, for example. But in terms of investment, I think this should be a wake-up call to BC when you can't sell a project of this magnitude on a worldwide market. And I don't understand why. I'd love to see some type of study put into it in terms of the factors that went into this non-sellable asset. Well, when I first heard the announcement from Chevron that they were going to try to sell their 50% stake last year, you know, I was kind of hopeful that somebody would pick it up, because I've seen it change hands before. I mean, they're not the original proponents. And so I thought, okay, it'll be interesting to see who comes in and does some tire kicking versus the serious buyers. And to find out that there was no serious buyers and to find out there's no tire kickers, that is actually shocking to me. Very shocking. I mean, there's not really one single project in the Kitimat area that I'm not aware of. I haven't seen anything really new come up in Skeena since I was chief counselor in 2017. And I know all the background of it. I know all the foundational pieces that were put together for all of that. But I never thought I'd see a day where a fully permitted, supported project like Chevron could not get sold. And now Woodside leaving is just another signal to me that there is something wrong with the investment climate in BC. I was betting people that Petronas would be front in line and they'd probably be one of the bigger stakeholders in the Chevron project. I'm lucky nobody took me up in that bet, because they're nowhere to be found. I mean, some of the state-controlled companies in Asia and India, I mean, they're sending proponents out, their representatives to go look for LNG and looking for energy. And they're not here. I mean, I'm talking about state-controlled or actually state-influenced companies. And they're not here. I mean, we're talking some really big players in terms of the energy world. So I just don't understand what happened this time around. I don't understand. And you think about the 20 projects who were on the books in BC for LNG projects 10 years ago, they're all gone. They're all gone. Chevron and LNG Canada were the last two major projects. LNG Canada is still constructing their project, but Chevron's KMLNG project, no, they haven't actually moved in the last couple of years in terms of any type of interest on the international market.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Over a century ago, President Woodrow Wilson enacted a law that would become known as the Jones Act. Its purpose was to help the U.S. shipping industry recover after World War I. In this final segment of Open Connection, MLA Ellis shares how any changes to the Jones Act could affect business in BC.
The cruise ship industry was a couple months ago was actually making statements about what the United States was planning in terms of bypassing BC ports, in terms of the cruise ship industry. And I picked up on this just by chance. And I'm a water guy. That's where I worked on the water. I hunted and fished on the water. I actually took some courses in bridge watchman and skipper training. So when I read this, I didn't quite understand what the Jones Act was. But the Jones Act basically says, for simplicity's sake, if a cruise ship is traveling from Seattle to Alaska, well, by law, you have to stop in Canadian ports. And that's essentially why cruise ships were stopping in Prince Rupert, Vancouver, Victoria. So Alaskan lawmakers were asking Canada and BC, could we continue to stop in Canadian ports, and we don't allow anybody to get off the boats, but we just want to stop in your port to be compliant with the Jones Act? Well, they were told no. So the lawmakers, in turn, went around and then started to pass an act that said, for temporary purposes, we have to suspend the Jones Act so our cruise ships can go from Seattle to Alaska without stopping Canadian ports. Well, the BC government said, basically was telling us that while you're just fear-mongering, BC Liberals, and this is not going to happen, they have to go to the House of Representatives to vote, they have to do all this other stuff. Well, 2 days ago, the House of Representatives actually approved it unanimously. Republicans and Democrats. And in fact, there were some lawmakers in the United States and saying, why are we just doing this for COVID? Why don't we make this a permanent measure? And this one is hard to argue in terms of the rationale. On top of that, we have lawmakers in the United States that are really angry that Angry in BC refused to help out the cruise ships in the United States. Now, this has an impact on the tourism economy of BC because currently, or previous to COVID, the cruise ship industry stopping in Vancouver, Victoria, and Prince Rupert represented $2.7 billion in revenues, plus the jobs, plus the restaurants, plus the hotels, the people that tie up boats, fuel sales. And I'm sure there's a lot that I'm missing here, but you kept trying to bring this up in the legislature, and we were kept told to stop fear-mongering and don't worry about it. It's just a blip. Well, it's not a blip. And the lawmakers in the United States got really offended when they heard that BC called this measure a blip. And so they started making social media posts about, well, guess what? We're going to help out our tourism economy and save the jobs, of Alaskan people, but not BC. They said that specifically in their tweets. So not only did we actually drop the ball in helping out the cruise ship industry in terms of tourism, we actually angered a global superpower, the lawmakers of the United States. And now the BC government is talking about going up to Alaska to talk to the leaders in Alaska and try to see if they can find some kind of resolve so this doesn't turn into a permanent measure. It's fairly late because the last measure the United States needs now is a signature of Joe Biden, President Joe Biden. That's all they need. So I think that the short-term goal now is actually open up those lines of communications with those United States lawmakers, as well as do what we can to make sure this is not permanent. Well, I've heard this conversation a number of times over the last 10 years, but really didn't know about what it would take to take the idea of value added to reality. We've seen it here in Terrace already, where Skeena Sawmills has taken out the waste wood, for lack of a better word, out of our forests and actually transformed them into pellets for the worldwide market. That's an example of value added. Well, in this case, I do get requests from investors and developers who say, we want to do something with the resource that you have in BC. Like say, we know you have a lot of waste wood. Well, we would like to come in and set up a plant that makes plywood out of your waste wood, out of the chips. Those are the kind of conversations where you're talking about an idea, but it takes a lot of work to get that idea to reality. And that's what I've been doing for the last 17 years, trying to get projects from ideas to realities. And that's how we got LNG built in, or starting to get built in Kitimat. We also have another project that I actually am supporting in Prince George, where you take the natural gas resource, you take that out of the pipeline, you take out the byproducts, and you actually turn that into plastic. So plastic pen, for example, this could be made out of natural gas byproducts. But what they're talking about is a high-grade plastic for the aeronautical industry or the electric car industry or your camera equipment here. High-grade plastics. And so I like it for two reasons. Number one, you're creating an economy and you're not sending over a raw resource overseas, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to take out the byproduct and they're going to make plastics and sell it back to us. We should be doing that here in BC. The other reason why I like it is because when you take out the byproducts out of the pipeline, you're actually sending a cleaner product to Asia to burn. So I like the idea, but it's going to take a reversal of the politics and the attitudes of the people of BC, as well as our leadership. And I know it can be done because everybody said LNG was never going to happen, 17 years ago. But you put the right people in the room and you start doing the right communication with the people of BC, this can be done. And there's other proposals that I've looked at as well. And I'm pretty sure we can do this, but it's going to take investment. And the investors that are actually willing to take that risk need to know that they'll be supported.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our mastery within. I'm Robert Pictou.